Fantastic. Oh. Right, welcome to this panel, and while everyone else gets their seats and gets comfortable, so I'm Chris Hemsley. I'm a payments and regulatory expert, and when I was at the Payment Systems Regulator, I spent a lot of time worrying about fraud and collaborating with government and also industry to try and improve outcomes. And I think with that in mind, I'm going to start, before I do introduce the panel, just to make a bit of a link to the overall theme of today, and Janine's energising start to the day, talking about growth and innovation. Well, this is part of this puzzle. So fraud gets in the way. It has a huge personal impact on victims, but it also costs businesses money. It means that good businesses can sometimes fail, and it also can make it much harder for payment firms and other financial services firms to innovate and compete. So this is inherently part of the puzzle around innovation, competition, and growth. So with that, and I think everyone's now comfortable, I will introduce our panel. So we have a very fantastically knowledgeable and diverse panel to talk about these issues. So starting on the far side, we have Fran Dowling, who's the Deputy Director and Head of Fraud Policy at the Home Office. And Fran is responsible for the UK strategic response to fraud, and that includes the UK's fraud strategy. We have Jaffer, who is the President for Commercial Operations at Markaaz. We have Anastasia Sakharova, who is the Head of Compliance at Sumsub, and Marinier, Financial Crime Compliance Industry Practice Lead at Moody's. So we're going to start with the government, then we're going to talk about industry, then we're going to go a bit more international. So Fran, the fairly predictable question, what is the government doing about fraud, and what is the UK's fraud strategy? Over to you.
Yeah, a fairly predictable question, but a fair question. So I'll probably start by saying why is the government quite heavily focused on this? And it's the usual stats that you'll hear all the time, but they really are having an impact. So fraud is 45% of all crime now in England and Wales. We're looking at 1 in 4 businesses who are impacted by fraud, and it's costing our economy billions. And when we look at it, we're looking at 80% of fraud having some cyber element to it, 70% of that with some overseas element. And so this is not just a crime, it's actually a real threat to the economy and the economic stability of the UK, hence it being a national security threat. So that's the why we're doing it. And the question, I guess, is what has changed? Fraud is not always 45% of all crime that people saw by any stretch of imagination. And frankly, it's the move online, which has meant that it's so much easier to target individuals and businesses from a huge range of places. So that's the tricky pattern, and we see it as well with things around the fact that it's not just older demographics. Increasingly, it's younger generations who are being targeted, and things like investment fraud that are bubbling up. So what are we going to do about it? So we've launched the UK's fraud strategy back in March, and that was a hugely collaborative effort with private sector as well. We had close to 1,500 different submissions in. We ran numerous workshops and had real deep dives, because there's a number of ways we can tackle fraud. We can do it, we can collaborate, we can take ideas from industry. Sometimes it moves to voluntary charters where different industry groups decide what they'd like to do, and then obviously there's regulation and legislation. I'm going to call out a few things from the fraud strategy that I think are particularly important. Firstly, there's 58 actions within it, and don't worry, there's no way I'm going to go through 58. But the first key pillar is disrupt, so trying to stop this huge volume of attacks that are coming into the UK. And within the disrupt pillar, one of the actions is something called the Online Crime Centre, which is starting properly this April, but has been in a pilot stage for the last year. And that really calls to both the key answer to how we're going to tackle, really improve our response to fraud, which is around collaboration. So the Online Crime Centre unites UK government, police services, UK intelligence community, particularly on the cyber side, private firms from the banking, telco, tech, and cyber industries. And really importantly, and it's working while looking at the pilot phases, we've been able to share data incredibly quickly. so that we can be much faster at responding to what we're seeing coming through. And it's not just about enriching the data picture so that companies are more able to identify fraud early on, and equivalently police services are more able to tackle it, but it's also going to help us design out the problem, because it's back to that puzzle point. We've all got different bits of the puzzle, but when we put them together, we can really, really resolve this. So I'm going to stop there on the Online Crime Centre, but I'm going to leave with one final line, which is that this is a new beast with a lot of government money and backing behind it, and there are lots of opportunities to get involved. So I'll leave that out there, and I work at the Home Office, work on fraud. My teams would welcome people being in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran. And I think there's just picking up one of the things you just said there about the internationalization of fraud and the kind of technology that's being deployed here, is that one of my reflections definitely is that you have to see this as like it's a professional business of fraud. This isn't amateurs, so we have to be professional, we have to be joined up and collaborative. So I think that's really, really important. So Yas, talking about that and our theme of sort of collaboration and data sharing, could you talk to us a bit about how and what does fraud data sharing look like and maybe the impact it has?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting to hear what you've had to say, because I've been part of this industry for a while now, and I've always said, data sharing is probably going to be key to what's going to help solve the problems that we're seeing in the industry. And whilst I've been trying to push that in the industry, it's still quite fragmented and reactive and inconsistent. Unfortunately, most banks and institutions today are siloed with the way that they use their data, whether it's in-house within one bank or whether it's even with their own partner banks. They're just not sharing data. And I think the problem that we are finding is that data is being used as one snapshot, point in time, reactive piece of data at the time of onboarding. There's no real-time monitoring that's going on. There's a desire to do that, but it's not happening yet. And I think at the heart of all of that is trust. Building trust among your data, the people, your partners, your clients, is what's going to help us get to a point of sharing data in an effective way. For my sins, many, many years ago, I built a KYC utility. No one adopted this because there was no trust in the industry. We've got to move to a point where there is trust amongst the industry to try and tease out those bad actors collectively as an industry. And I think the other main point I'll make about this is we shouldn't just look at data as data. As you said, a lot of the people now today that are working are much younger. We've got new technology, it's much smarter. And what we need to think about now is really data intelligence. We need to shift to data intelligence. We need to think about sharing data, pulling it all together, getting one single view, ongoing monitoring of that, and using that as signals and intent to solve the problem that we're seeing today in the challenges. Because the bad actors, they're moving within the banks, within those silos, and that's where they're hiding. And if we don't share the data, we don't share that intelligence, we'll never be able to tease them out.
And maybe, could you say maybe a bit about, or maybe the other panelists as well might want to come in, is that sort of how, some of the ways you can do that? Because, I mean, some of the optimistic case here, and I've certainly heard this, is from a large insurance company, which I won't name, described AI as actually one of the tools to get around those data silos. Is that something that kind of resonates with you in your experience? Yes, why don't you go first, and then I think Francis wants to come in as well.
I will say one thing before I hand over to Francis, which is I do believe AI can help. I really do. However, at the heart of any good AI tool is trust data. You have to have good data coming in first. It's the age-old problem of rubbish in, rubbish out. So if you have really, really good data, trusted at the foundation, AI can be laid on top of that. But it's knowing what to do with AI and what to do with that data in terms of the intelligence that will solve the problem. Too many people will keep talking about AI as a kind of a silver bullet, and it's not. You have to know that the data you're using is trusted, it's monitored, it's good, it's fresh, and then you can lay on top all of the sophistication of AI. Go ahead.
I completely agree. One of the elements I would say is when you talk about the foundations is that's MDM, master data management, right? When we talk about AI, it's just like when the internet came up, and people were like, oh my God, the internet is fantastic. Yes, AI is also fantastic, but it's the means to do something, and therefore being able to look at the data standardization. And even if we use AI in a generic term, if we think of Gen AI versus automation, even a good old automation, machine learning can be part of AI as well. If you have a clean, standardized data, that works. If you structured it correctly, then you could do that. Gen AI is, of course, one level up, but really looking at standards is the key. And you talked about fresh data, like the expression, of course, on lenience and data integrity all over, essentially.
Yeah. And I think, so I think there's something there definitely around using the tools to kind of get around the problems of the systems in the past, but absolutely right. There's that key distinction that AI will just make bad data look good and actually isn't any better.
Yeah, and I will also say one of the key things we're focused on at Markaaz is it's not having one source of data. We collect data from multiple sources. That helps as well, but also we are building an ecosystem. We have built an ecosystem of different partners. And when you become the connective tissue between those partners, pulling in different sets of data, and I was just saying this to Francis earlier on, actually, in the green room, that actually the wealth of data and the richness of data that we have, it helps to really iron out those gaps that you're finding when your data is siloed, is fragmented. And so I think, and that goes cross-border as well.
So just one more build from me, I guess, is that because we've unfortunately Visa couldn't be with us today, but the other data silo is that there's places in the sort of more public sphere where this sort of data exists. And I know Visa was one of the companies that had access to the faster payments data, and there's some really impressive results from the trials there to use that extra pool of data to kind of complete the picture. So I think that's another, if I was building on your description, Yas, there's the joining up the pools within an organisation, between organisations, but also between the private and public spheres, and to get the best out of it. Right, shall we move on? So Francis, I think you're going to start to expand our horizons internationally.
Am I?
I think that's the plan. I think that's what we agreed you were going to do, definitely.
Of
So, of course, we started off with a bit more of a UK focus, but we are in a wider ecosystem. Fran, you made the point that this is most of the time, I can't remember your stats, it's quite impressive.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
80% has 80% has some sort of cyber element, and then 70% we're pretty sure has an international element.
Yeah, fantastic. So this is an international challenge, but also an opportunity to learn from other international colleagues. So, Francis.
Yeah. And we see it everywhere. Even last week, I had a couple of fixes myself, and Hong Kong police reported 66% of their fraud is online. Roughly the same percentage, sadly. With frauds that are increasing year on year. Working on PPPs, and this is called it without saying it's a PPP, but working across our data silos in-house, across organizations, looking at clients who engage not only just with one provider, absolutely, and be able to get an ecosystem, but also being able to understand cross-border information. We've seen a number of behaviors change in the last maybe 12 to 24 months. Keep me honest if you think that's been longer than that, but really emerge on looking at a fraud data pool that is a mix of internal and external data, obviously, but also being able to engage more broadly. And I know the term of data interoperability we're discussing with Anastasia is a bit cringe at the moment because every single conference mentions it. So I'm not going to mention data interoperability, but it is happening a lot more than we had it. I was a head of compliance until 3 years ago. And I had the ability to have that information, more interoperability across risks, we would have been able to do a lot more analytics. At least that's what I'm telling myself. The engagement between fraud, AML, sanctions, and cyber, increasingly, and Fran, you've highlighted it, is critical. Now, the 3 pillars of the UK policy, which, by the way, was signed here in this very building a couple of weeks ago, so, echo very much the European environment and part of APAC as well. We're seeing 2 key developments from the clients that we work with at Moody's is how to capture a network at a time T. So very much that idea, yes, that of course looking at network building, but also knowledge graphs, particularly on asset. And often we think of fraud just in terms of networks, not necessarily much in terms of assets, which is a key element in asset recovery, and that's part of the safeguard and respond, right, policy. Now moving safely outside of the UK, because that was the idea, is what's working. What we see working is working on 3 criteria. Every PPP that is working on something that is giving trust, and trust not only on data but in the process. It's a process of real time, absolutely, but also engaging on, do I have many-to-many disruption? If not, then it's probably not scalable. If I have this, then do I have 3 criteria and pseudonymization, which is having no party access to other IDs for other parties? Do I have a guarantee that I can't re-identify later on? We get asked that a lot when I try to get Moody's data engaged in PPPs, and of course, in-house, I get asked as well, like, how do you get those criteria done? And all parties across PP want to have that done. I think of the Europol Financial Intelligence. There's been a brilliant PPP on this. And then the last one is, of course, a purpose limitation through just really the architecture, not just procedure, right? So do I ensure that the architecture of what is being built, my PPP, is correctly done? To look outside and cross-border, I want to refer to the Article 75 of the AML directive, which really sort of starts to look at the European network. We've seen FIUs unite last year since March. We're starting to see 59 FIUs work together, which as an obligated entity and next set of financial crime, is really changing the game, because suddenly we're having that conversation between public and private parties together. So what works? Multi-party computation, and if I was trying to isolate 2 factors that I thought, okay, 2 takeaways: multi-party computation, absolutely a requirement, and then private set intersections would be my 2 takeaways for any PPPs working on fraud data.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Anastasia, I know at Sumsub you've been doing some more, you work on fraud typology, and also I think you're going to talk to us a bit about the kind of some of the trends you're seeing from your perspective. So yeah, so how is fraud changing, or what are the emerging trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, thank you. So the main trend, or the main shift in the anti-fraud strategy, is that is what we call sophisticated shift, because fraud, of course, is changing, and criminals now moving away from high volume attacks, and now they do fewer but much more smarter and dangerous attacks. Yeah, we see in general 3 big trends. The first one is that AI is industrializing fraud. So criminals, fraudsters can buy a ready-made fraud as a service kits, fraud as a service platforms, and these systems provide a high quality and high quality fake IDs and synthetic videos. The second trend is that the fraudsters can use autonomous AI agents, and these agents can plan and can run attacks on verification systems themselves with almost no human interference. Yeah, and finally, the third trend is that fraudsters attack verification system itself. So they manipulate SDKs, APIs, they inject synthetic cameras feeds, they manipulate device fingerprints. So that's why we say that strong KYC is not enough. We should also use ongoing transaction monitoring, ongoing behavioral monitoring, ongoing device monitoring. So, yeah.
I think that phrase, that fraud as a service, that goes back to that point of these are professionals, and there's a market here that is depressingly innovative, and we need to kind of raise our game in response. I guess coming back to that kind of that cross-border challenge, Fran, I think, so you talked about the fraud strategy and the kind of activity within the UK. Yeah, could you broaden us out and can you go global, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, as I said, 70% of this has an overseas element. So there's really, a very limited amount that we can do purely domestically. So there are two key things that the UK does. Firstly, we sign and have very strong bilateral relationships with some core countries. So we've got an MOU with Nigeria, which has resulted in arrests, shutting down of scam centres, really, really quick actions. That's been fantastic. The other thing I'd call out, which was also an action in the strategy, was the Global Fraud Summit. And I think the BBC picked up on that over the weekend. That was in Vienna. That had 1,400 participants, 173 different countries were represented, and 40 different ministers from different countries came along. And that's a huge change in the level of focus and interest from other countries, which makes a really big difference to our engagement and work. The other thing I'd call out about the Global Fraud Strategy is it was a completely innovative event because it had, for the first time, private sector there as a key part. So there were PPP initiatives that were signed by numerous countries. There was one that went further from the UK that was signed by the Five Eyes, G7, Japan and South Korea, plus big tech firms like Meta and Google. And it really, really set the framework, because one thing that business has been saying to us is that please don't end up with a fragmented international system. It would be fantastic if we could be really, really clear about what the framework is. And that goes back to my ask again, tell us what we can do. And the other thing I'll call out from that Global Fraud Summit is we gained agreement for an Interpol task force. They always have crazy names, so Shadow Storm. But within that is designed to go after some of those enormous scam centres in Southeast Asia. So it's working with private sector, putting the pieces of the puzzle together on the data and acting quickly to tackle that pretty horrendous threat. Thanks.
And I think I just more power to your elbow there, because I had the pleasure of attending the first fraud summit, which was in Whitehall. Not quite as glamorous, but still pretty glamorous. But I think that's something the UK has to offer, is that use of that soft power, but then, yeah, as you said, the kind of harder edge to kind of have real impact on the ground. Francis, it looks like you want to add a build.
I wanted to salute some of the successes already before Vienna. There was the Prince Group last year. There was a major case, and really highlighting within fraud investigations the fact that all the underlying predicate offences, sadly, are usually engaged with human trafficking, environmental crime, kidnapping, and 22 predicate offences in Europe. Sadly, all of them widely used, and that's just has a naming convention, right? There's a lot in Vienna. There's been a lot of focus as well on technology and innovation, because sadly we're the only one to follow the rules. Criminals don't, and the engagement on the shift of regulation as well, and being able to be not focused on typology, but really being able to I can't name the brand, but play with little cubes that you put together and deblock and unblock, and really be able to look at the level of granularity of a data point. What is the characteristics, and how do you rebuild that through a data estate? One of the key guidance I've seen from Vienna is compliance officers and FIU saying, go and talk to your data officers. What do you have in-house? What do you need externally? And says this point, other elements of biometrics, how do you gear that up together in one framework?
Fantastic. Right. That clock's about to go red. So but we have got just about enough time for one final word or two each. But the challenge is, if you had a magic wand, what's the one, I think only one thing that you would ask of, or you'd like to see from either the market, from governments, regulators perhaps? Maybe, Fran, this might be an unfair question to you, but let's say yes. Why don't I start with you?
I have two. And I know you said one.
You should quit.
But I think it's to mandate a trusted business layer, an identity layer, I think, for sharing. It has to be crucial, and I think that's the only way we're going to make this work. I think the second one is, and I've been listening to everyone speak today, but it's to think about rewarding compliance with growth. and rewarding that. Because what I think one of the problems that we have is with fraud and the issues that we're seeing is whilst you can stay compliant and you've got adherence, you have to be compliant. There's no reward off the back of that apart from not getting a fine, right? So actually, if you look at compliance as a growth engine and what you can unlock to create more opportunities in an organization, you see more value out of that. And maybe we just need to change the mind shift and change that mind shift of actually compliance as a growth engine, not just avoidance of penalties.
So there's a reward. Anastasia, it's now flashing red.
Okay, so I would make regulatory expectations more actionable in how fraud signals and fraud controls are actually implemented, because most guidance and most regulation is principle-based, and this sounds good in theory, but in practice, this leaves a huge room for interpretation, especially for startups.
Fantastic. Francis, you're going to be incredibly brief, or we're going to get
super quickly
kicked off.
It would be get your data Gen AI ready and focus on the standardization. I would love to see a collab between the NCA and OLAF. Would be fantastic on that standardization.
Brilliant. So Fran, there's a start of a list for you, I think. So, but if you could all join me in thanking our panel, who've been incredibly generous with their time, and thank you for your contributions.